This is where I want to start. The woman who runs Human Rights Campaign, this group that used to be all about gay rights, but now is transmogrified into all about trans rights. Her name is Kelly Robinson, and she sent out a tweet not long ago that I see often from these trans activists. And her tweet read, "Trans women are women. That's it. That's the tweet." It's a lie. And the more I read your book, the more I came to realize why the lie is so important to their activists and why it's so important for us on the side of reality and reason to call it out as a lie. That trans women are in fact men. They are biological men. They are men. And them trying to change that understanding it's for a reason, and it's critical to them winning this debate. Can you expand on that?
Sure. I mean, this is a movement that is entirely linguistic. I mean, we aren't actually able to change sex. Everyone who has ever thought about anything about human beings knows we're mammals. We know we evolved that way, and mammals can't change sex. You're conceived male or female, and that's what you're going to grow up. You can, a man who castrates himself does not become a woman. A woman who has a neophallus crafted out of her thigh and stitched onto her groin does not become a man. We all know that. So the only meaning that you can give to statements like trans women are women is a linguistic one. It's all about words, that we're changing the definition of words, and that by changing the words, we change the reality. And that's why this is a movement that is so keen on censoring people. Because as far as they're concerned, when you say, as you just did, no, trans women are men, that speech act is creating a reality that they don't like. And so they must silence you to give space for the speech act that they like, which is trans women are women, full stop, no debate. That's it. That's the tweet. And by saying it, they think that creates reality. It's sort of a queer theory thing. It comes very much from universities, this postmodern turn, they call it, in which you think that everything is socially constructed, that everything is about language, that the words that you use can erase all sorts of inconvenient facts about the world, and you end up with the world that you want because it's the world that you're creating with your words. And the word inclusion has become such a buzzword that we forget that a lot of things depend on exclusion, in particular definitions do. A definition of what a woman is necessarily excludes all men, and vice versa. And yet when you say, oh, well, I want to be inclusive, well, who do you want to be inclusive of? If this space is only for children, it can't be inclusive of adults. If it's only for women, it can't be inclusive for men. That's just definitional. And yet, because everyone has got very bound up in the idea that inclusion is good and exclusion is bad, the language plays into their narrative that you're the meanie, you're excluding people. And you're like, well, of course I'm excluding them. This is meant to be a women-only space. Why would I include men? It can't be women only. I remember shortly after my book came out, going to an event and saying that I never imagined, I spent far too long in education, Megyn. I did a maths degree, and then I went on and did a PhD in mathematics, and I stayed and did a postdoc. And I never thought that I was going to spend the most important part of my working life saying, once you allow a man into a space for women, it ceases to be single sex, because this isn't even logical. It's just a truism. And yet I find myself saying, we can't allow people who aren't in a group into a space that's meant just for that group and keep it only for that group. Like sometimes I think the noise is not coming out of my mouth. Am I moving my lips and nothing's happening? Right. It's so very obvious. So the two most common sex crimes are exhibitionism, which is showing your private parts to someone who doesn't want to see them, and voyeurism, which is looking at other people's naked bodies without consent. And so those statistics come from a time that those were difficult crimes to commit. But now, if a man can say he's a woman and enter a women-only space, he can commit voyeurism and exhibitionism with impunity. And he'll either not be registered as committing a crime at all, because, of course, if you go into a women's locker room, it's allowable to get undressed, and you will see other people undressed. So it won't be recorded as a crime, or if it is, it'll be recorded as a crime by women. So the statistics are going to be messed up on top of everything else. And crime is often, many crimes are what's called crimes of opportunity. So it's not like there's a set amount of burglary out there or a set amount of voyeurism or exhibitionism. The amount of it depends on how easy it is to commit those crimes and how rewarding and how likely you are to be punished. And what we're doing is we're making it much, much, much easier for men to commit sex crimes against women, and much, much, much harder for women even to report them, let alone to get justice. So we can expect a big uptick in sex crimes by men against women. That's just the way it's going to play out.
So Helen, I didn't get to the third danger to allowing men into women's spaces. We talked about sexual predators. We talked about the possibility of pedophiles, but there's also the Leah Thomas danger. And that is the danger of men who have autogynéphilie. Now, we don't know for sure that Leah Thomas has autogynéphilie, but the Daily Wire did an in-depth report on Leah Thomas's social media, which strongly suggests that Leah Thomas is an autogynephile. Your book spends a lot of time talking about Ray Blanchard, who is a sexologist who coined this terminology. And it's an important term to understand because according to your book, looking at Blanchard's reporting, as many as 82% of straight trans people, like men who claim they're women, who are not gay, are in fact autogynephiles. So can you explain what that is?
Sure. I'm going to say before I start, though, that I don't care what a man's motivation for coming into women's spaces is. He's not welcome. I don't care if he's very sincere. I don't care if he's not a pervert. I don't care if he's gay or straight. It's a women's space. He is not welcome. As they say, good men
Amen.
Keep out so that we can keep everybody else out. I don't allow my husband, I don't allow my sons into women's spaces, and I expect them to respect women's boundaries. That said, there are different motivations for thinking that you are a member of the opposite sex, both for men and for women. And among men, the two common presentations are, one, that they were very, very effeminate or feminine, or to use the pejorative term, sissy little boys. And the world, maybe their own family, gave them the strong impression that this was not okay, and that a little boy who's like them has something wrong with him and is a girl, really. Now, that kid, if he's supported and nobody lies to him about what's possible, will grow up to understand that he's a gay man and hopefully, be a happy, healthy, fully functioning gay man in adulthood. Unfortunately, we're transing those kids now, so we are taking away their futures from them. But the other group are straight men who have an unusual, whether you think of it as a sexual orientation or a sexual fetish will depend on how you think sex works. But what attracts them and excites them sexually is the idea of themselves as women. That's their fantasy. It's almost as if they're in love with the woman version of themselves. And that's where all these phrases like, I have a woman inside, I am really a woman inside, come from. And it's on a spectrum with erotic cross-dressing, which is a common male sexual interest. Lots of straight men do dress up as women and find it sexy. So some of these men become more and more and more bought into this fantasy, to the extent that as they get older, it becomes impossible, or they think it's impossible, to live without acting out that fantasy. And they don't want to just keep the fantasy woman to their bedroom or to their, going away on cross-dressing weekends with other men or whatever it is, or sharing pictures on some cross-dressing website. And now, of course, they can go and say, I'm really a woman. And I actually think that a lot of them think they are really women. Like they've been fantasizing about this woman for so long that she feels very real to them. And now, of course, they're stunning and brave. They're the best women. But what is so unusual and destructive about this sexual desire and urge is that it requires everybody else to play along. That's part of the fantasy. And that's not true of sexual desires in general. Like, I'm a heterosexual woman. I don't need other people to validate that, as long as my own husband agrees with me that I'm a heterosexual woman and we stay together. That's it. The rest of the world doesn't have to play along with anything for that. But if you're a man whose deepest sexual desire is that he is really a woman, then that man requires everybody, specifically women, to agree with him. And he doesn't just want to cross-dress, he wants to come into women-only spaces because he wants to be in the place where his womanhood is validated. So that doesn't just mean that he wants to use the women's toilets and the women's changing rooms and so on because that's convenient. It means he wants to use them for validation. He goes into them specifically. So all these men, they go and they join menopause support groups on Facebook.
Oh,
they join women-only swim sessions when actually there's a mixed sex session as well. They do all these things that only women can do because that's the thing that they get off on. And any woman who says, sorry, mate, you're a man, not welcome, she's striking a blow at the heart of his own self-image and his erotic fantasy as well. And men and their sex drives, you know, it's one of the forces that moves this world, is what men want sexually. And these men are very, very motivated. I think of them as the beating nuclear reactor at the heart of this movement. They may not even be numerically the biggest part of this movement. And in fact, the foot soldiers of this movement are the young women who have grown up in queer theory at universities, and they're the worst for parroting that trans women are women. But without this hard core of men whose dearest and sole desire in life is to force everybody to pretend that they're women, this would not have got so far. And the worst thing about this, sort of to finish the, you know, why these people are the toxic beating nuclear reactor at the heart of this movement, is because it's so central to their self-image and so central to their sexual fantasy that they really are women. They don't want you to play along. They don't want you to be like, yeah, whatever, okay, you know, you're basically like a drag queen, you know, I don't care if men wear women's clothes. And so they say that they were always that way, that really inside they're women. And that means they have to have been trans children. It means there have to have been trans children. So these men are the ones who want children put on sterilizing drugs because to validate their sexuality. They're so dangerous.
You write in the book about a trans woman named Anne Lawrence who came across Ray Blanchard's work in 1994 and dug deep on the subject of autogynéphilia and concluded, as others have as well, that almost anything coded female or feminine can cause an intense erotic arousal that seems to simultaneously animate and discredit autogynephiles' desire to have female bodies. So they get turned on by anything female or feminine. Her informants that spoke to her, the people speaking to her, recount erotic fantasies of pushing a baby buggy, joining a knitting circle, being called ma'am, having bubble gum blowing contests with girls, wearing clip-on earrings, taking birth control pills, having a pap smear test, and so on. And then you go on to say, they often eroticize aspects of womanhood that most women dislike, such as menstruation, undergoing intimate medical examinations, experiencing sexism, or wearing uncomfortable clothes. Can I tell you something? I'm going to confess something to you, Helen. Somebody I know, suddenly, I don't see this person often, but they're in my circle, is a man who transitioned, quote unquote, to female. And I saw this person. I was shocked to see that they were now going around as a woman, trying to be. And this person went off to me about how he'd already been Me Too'd, how some man had already tried to harass him and grab his non-existent breasts. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this is such a load of crap. I mean, I was polite to this person, but all I could think was, what on earth is going on here, right? And when I read this, I was like, oh, I get it. It's part of it.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, we've both been young women, and young women can be very naive. I think we are naive about what I tend to think of as men and their bullshit. Like, you learn as you get older. And of course, there's women and their bullshit. I always have to say I'm not anti-men, but there is a specific category of men and their bullshit. And one of those, for this particular group of men, it's, I want to join absolutely everything that's for women. I too get menstrual cramps. You'd be amazed how many trans women insist that they get menstrual cramps and that it's caused by the hormones, the cross-sex hormones they're taking. You can't have menstrual cramps if you don't have a uterus, because it's the uterus that's cramping. You know, so obvious, but it turns them on. They're getting off on this. And there's young women saying things like, you can pee next to me. They just want to pee. I'm fine with this. You know, they're doing the whole be kind bullshit that women are indoctrinated into and that women get harassed if we don't go along with. But they're also very, very naive. Like, as you get older, you know that more of what animates men than you thought ever when you were in your teens, it's sex. These men are getting off on it.